Hello, everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and this is our noon broadcast. And this is Conversations with Asha, Millennials Speak. And today, our guest is Tandava. And
Hello.
say hello to the people, Tandava. That's very
Hello.
nice. Today, you can see, for those who've been watching, this is our third broadcast. There's a few people who are allowed to come into the house, Chela Bhavan, where we're filming from. And others who are not, but actually because we had to film at a 6-foot distance looking at the first two episodes, you really couldn't see anybody's face. You could just see a big expanse of blank wall. So it's pretty likely that we're going to continue these on Zoom, even if in a couple of cases we could be together, just because I think it's going to be a better view for all of you guys. So Tandava's will tell us more about himself in a moment, but first, Tandava, we have to start with a full disclosure, so perhaps you're the one who should give it. Would you please?
I informed Asha just before we started that I am not, in fact, a millennial. I am 40 now. I was born in 1979, and I don't know what exactly that makes me, but I never cared much about getting labeled anyway, and she still let me come on the program, so here we are.
Well, from my perspective of 72,
We're
you're
all millennials.
definitely, pardon me?
We're all millennials.
Yes, you're all millennials. That's exactly right. But nonetheless, I think you qualify because I happen to know a little bit about your background, but tell us just, sort of what you did before you came to Ananda and what your interests were, what you were following, where you went to school, and so on.
I went to the school at the same place Asha went to briefly, which was Stanford, and then I spent 5 years at Google, so I had sort of the whole Silicon Valley experience here. And Google was fun for a while, but after 5 years or so, I kind of got tired of running that race and playing that game. And I could sort of see that there were a lot of really bright people having a really good time with it, but I had kind of reached the limit of what I felt I could get out of it, or what I could do, and I couldn't really see anywhere else to go. Yes.
I was just going to ask you a question. You told me once how you happened to get I was going to say fired there, but that's not what I meant. How you happened to get hired there. So tell me how you happened to get hired there. Do you remember? You were told me about a blog that you had or something like that.
Oh,
Do I
well, I
remember?
worked I worked on the Blogger product. So,
Uh-huh.
and which I was using already, so that helped. It was actually my third try getting into Google. Um,
You made 3 tries getting in? I mean, what
yeah, that
happened?
was when it eventually did it.
Okay, so now give me, because so I'll understand it better, because see, I don't know any of these things. So what do you mean you had 3 tries? Like you just have to keep applying and getting rejected? Is
Yeah,
that
well, the
how it works?
first time I just honestly wasn't qualified for the job I was trying to get. The second time I was actually temping, and so I was in there for a while, but it was just a random job, literally filing papers in the legal department, and then I was out again, and eventually they bought Blogger. I was using Blogger. I could make a good case, and they hired me for that one, and it was
I
fun.
got it. I got it. So then go back to, so you're saying that a lot of people were having fun doing it, but you weren't having fun doing it? Is that how you put it? When you decided it was enough for you?
Yeah, it was a fun, exciting adventure. I have a bunch of very bright, very energetic people doing a lot of really neat stuff. Blogger in particular really struck me as a world-changing thing. Suddenly we had anybody in the world who could have an online presence, and this was brand new at the time. And we had a guy in Baghdad blogging about the bombs falling outside of his house. And
Wow.
these are the kind of things that just that kind of access to other people's experience was so new to the world and the internet, and it was really exciting to be a part of it.
Uh-huh. So what part did you play when you work at Google and you're working on that product for someone who's not even by any stretch of imagination a person who would do that? So like what did you actually have to do with that? Did you talk to the people who were blogging or did you just get to
Yeah,
facilitate it?
I worked in tech support. I was a little techier than a lot of the customer support people, but I
Uh-huh.
wasn't really techie enough to be an engineer.
Uh-huh.
So I got to be sort of the connecting link between the users and the product, which I liked because I've always enjoyed teaching things and explaining things and helping people. Um, and I was almost a computer science major in college, and I dropped it because I didn't want to just be playing with the computer all day. I needed to involve be involved with people as well. And so this was kind of that balance for me of getting to do something techy, but also helping people actually use it to do actual things that are important to them.
Oh, that's very good. What you had a double major in college? What was your second major? What else
Oh,
did you do?
I no, I had this weird conglomerate interdisciplinary major called symbolic systems.
Wait,
And
pause.
yeah,
Called symbolic systems?
symbolic systems, which doesn't mean anything because what it means is everybody gets to make their own mix of computer science, philosophy, linguistics, psychology, and music. So,
No,
uh,
no, just no. So there's a lot of people who wanted to combine all those things that there's an actual something called that, or was it
yep,
your own? No,
nope, nope, that's an actual thing. There's still a department there called symbolic systems.
symbolic systems.
Yep.
Okay, I'll just leave it. This is
But
why we're talking together because
what I
you're
decided
introducing
is what that major really means is I could put on my resume and spin it any way I wanted for any job I applied to.
and add it the name Stanford, and you had it.
Yeah,
You were
good
really
enough.
yeah. You know, I dropped out of Stanford after 1 year. I actually literally flunked out. I flunked out because I wasn't interested. I think I got reinstated. I have a vague memory that I might have gotten reinstated, but all I have to say is that I'm matriculated at Stanford. I was accepted at Stanford, and so I get all the cachet without having to spend all that money and all that
The
time.
wordsmith strikes again, yes.
So okay, so
Well, I
we're
loved my years at Stanford. I spent 5 years there just because I could, run around and take classes forever if you let me.
I
So,
see. So we had the opposite experience.
yeah, yeah,
So I also remember you're telling me that you used to do a lot of dancing of a certain
yeah,
kind when you were at Stanford. Tell me about that.
yeah, yeah. For 10 or 12 years, that was my main social activity, not to mention exercise. I did a lot of social ballroom dancing. So the classic ballroom dances that everybody would recognize, waltz, etc., but not competitively or anything like that, just
Hmm.
for fun socially.
And music.
And music. I
What
almost had a music minor. I realized after I graduated, I was one class away.
I
Could have done
see.
it.
You
So,
could have.
yeah.
So what do you do for music? What's your interest in music? Are you a composer, singer? I mean, I know some of what you do, but I don't know everything you do.
I um, I mostly an instrumentalist. I
Uh-huh.
sing somewhat. I've never identified with it as much. I've never felt like it's been as strong for me, but I love playing instruments and just learning different ones and figuring out how they all work.
Uh-huh.
Um, I've composed a little bit, not a ton, but every once in a while I have, not for a while. I started off doing folk music, so I did a lot of Irish fiddle tunes and things like that. Um, Nowadays, for the last 10 years, obviously, I've been playing a lot of Swami Kriya Nanda's music and accompanying singers for that. So that's been
Mhm.
my main thing, though I've also started getting into classical guitar just recently since I got a new nylon string guitar. So
I
that's
see.
been fun. But I get, I like to sort of run off on little tangents and learn a bit about this for a while and enjoy it and learn about a bit about this. For the last 6 years or so, I've done music for the school play, which has
Hmm.
actually been a lot of fun in that respect because it's a different theme every year.
Hmm.
And they can just say, okay, we need music for this year. It was Queen Esther from the Old Testament, so let's find a bunch of Jewish music, maybe some Persian sounding music, and I get to go off and find some and learn some and do something new for a while and then play with it.
Fabulous. So now let's come back. So we're at Google, and we've sort of I mean, just thinking if you were actually a millennial, if you were actually a millennial, you would have actually reached more or less the end point. We have gone to a prestigious university. We now have a job at one of the most desirable companies in the world. We're on the cutting edge of technology, but then you stopped. So what happened?
Yeah, it. And I was by no means at the top of Google either. I was, relatively low on the totem pole, just to be
Right. Okay.
clear.
So we're at
Um,
the bottom of Google,
yeah,
but we're in the door.
and something that happens a lot at places like that is that people might work at Google for a long time, but might be in a given job for a year, and then go
Uh-huh.
on to something else within the company or a different department or whatever it is. And partly because I came in so specifically for Blogger, which I was really committed to at the time, I didn't do that. And I had 5 years kind of doing the same thing. Not exactly, and the role expanded somewhat, but I wasn't really moving around doing different things. And by the time I started getting burned out on that, which is why I think a lot of people do switch around to the different jobs, I couldn't really see anything else I wanted to do at that same level. Excuse me. Like I said, Blogger really grabbed me. It felt really important. It felt really interesting. And I couldn't work up the same enthusiasm about, say, Google Calendar. You know,
I get it.
and there are probably a variety of ways I could have gone. I could have gone on to manage the team of people like me.
Uh-huh.
That was actually an offer on the table. But kind of everything that I looked at, I just had this feeling of,
Yeah,
why?
right.
What am I really going to enjoy that anymore? Is that going to, why was really the thing? And I couldn't see any reason to do anything more than anything else.
Were
Um,
you were you already interested in the spiritual path, or did it come at the same time?
Not very specifically. I mean, for a long time, it was there in my consciousness, sort of, but never as something I could really grab onto.
Right. What
And
changed?
uh, well, it was after I left Google, actually. So
I
leaving
see.
Google was actually a little bit like stepping off a cliff. And
Uh,
I will say that my family was very supportive, but a lot of people sort of went, "What? What are you
yeah.
doing?" Um, but I didn't know what I was going to do. Uh,
Uh-huh.
and I just said, "Okay, I can't work here anymore. I don't know what I can do, but I'm just going to take some time off and clear my head and see what happens." Um, Now, at that time, I had actually seen Swami Kriya Nanda already,
Hmm.
and this maybe half a year before. I don't think I knew what to do with that experience. I had a very strong, very powerful experience the first time I saw Swami Kriya Nanda. But
I'm going to
I,
stop you. What do you mean? I had a very strong experience the first time I saw Swami Kriya Nanda. Like, what does that mean?
yeah, so he was giving a talk in Palo Alto when he was passing through to or from an India trip, probably, and my mom just said, "Come here, see him." My mom always said it was her duty as a mother to get her kids in front of a saint at least once in her life. So, and she did. And and so I just went. And I remember one of the strong impressions I had was, wow, if I can be anything remotely like this when I am 80 years old, whatever I will have done to get there will have been worth it.
Well, that's a beautiful way to put it. You know, that's not dissimilar to what I thought. He has what I want. And yeah, but that's the same thing. I want to be like this man. Very good. So go on.
And
Uh-huh.
and I spent a lot of it grinning and crying and not knowing what was going on inside of me.
Huh.
I went up through the blessing line. Everybody lined up to go see Swami and get blessed. Excuse me.
Huh. You know,
And
it's
he
fun,
put,
Tandava, because I undoubtedly was in the room. I didn't
yes, you
meet
were
you
there
that time.
next to Swami and you introduced, this is Trish and this is her son. Um,
Oh, I did. Oh
And
my
yep.
goodness. Uh-huh.
And then I stood off on the side of the room watching the rest of the line go through and just standing there crying, really. And the end of the line came, I got back in the line and I went through again.
Huh.
Um, and I didn't really know what was going on. There was something going on that my heart was feeling and my mind did not know how to process it. But it was the catalyst. And for the longest time, I would always tell the story that I went and heard Swami Kriya Nanda, and it was great. And then I came to Ananda, and everything, the rest is history. It was a year and a half actually before I came in the church again,
Hmm.
because I think, I have this Gemini nature. It's all in my head, and this wasn't on board yet. It didn't know how to process any of what happened.
Uh-huh.
Um, so so now back to, so that happened a little before I left Google. And then I left Google and I didn't know what I was going to do. But the first thing I knew I was going to do was go on a meditation retreat, which was a Vipassana meditation retreat, because for 5 years, a friend at Google had been telling me, you have to go do one of these Vipassana retreats.
Right.
um, and it's interesting, just speaking of the same friend, one Christmas, he gave everyone in our team a spiritual book for
Uh-huh.
Christmas. And most people he gave sort of contemporary popular Buddhist books like Thich Nhat Hanh, Pema Chodron, those type of people. And he gave me the autobiography of a yogi.
Was that the first time you got it?
No, no, it
Your
wasn't
mom?
the first time. My mom had given it to me also, and I wasn't ready to read it when I was a teenager. But he
Uh-huh.
just gave it to me. I don't know why. I didn't read it that time either.
Uh,
But, and,
uh,
it wasn't his path, but somehow, I don't know, maybe he just tuned in that that was the one to give
you,
me.
you know, it's so amazing when you look back, when one looks back, and you see how the threads were just sitting there. Your mother gave it to you as a teenager. Your mother took you to Swami Kriya Nanda, but you had to wait. Okay, so now we're a Gemini and it's all in our
Yeah.
brain, but we don't know what to do with it.
But I knew I should meditate, and I had already seen Swami. I already knew about Ananda, but this guy had been telling me go do a Vipassana retreat forever, so I just did.
Uh-huh.
But it turned out like that was kind of right for me.
Uh-huh.
I could just I could grab onto it as a tool. I could sort of just start relating to this one fixed, limited thing as a tool, see how it worked in my body and my consciousness, start getting a grip on how it actually functions to some extent, but more importantly, let my mind relax about it and go, okay, yeah, there is something kind of to this.
Hmm.
And at some point, was it nearly a year after that? I don't remember what the impetus was. And actually, in this time, I did finally read the autobiography. I read your book about Swami Kriya Nanda as we have known him, because I knew there was something at Ananda, because I had met Swami. So I started
Mm-hmm.
reading all this in the background before I showed up, and I started listening to some of your talks, and you can explain things in a way that a Gemini mind likes, so that also helped. And the fact
Mm-hmm.
that I was doing some meditation, even if it wasn't from this path, helped because it's working on me on a level that I am not actually processing in my
No, I'm
mind.
gonna I'm gonna stop for just a second because I'm immensely curious about this. So did you like was Swami Kriyananda inside your consciousness, or was he just an idea out here of something that had happened? Just out of curiosity, if you can speak to that.
It's hard to say because at the time I doubt I would have had the awareness to distinguish.
Got it.
Um, I mean, looking back, I always, the way I feel about it is always that I went and saw Swami Kriyananda and boom, here I am. So it felt like there was a seed, a catalyst, something happened there. It took a long time for it to sprout,
Right.
but but it was planted at that very first meeting.
Interesting. Okay. So now we're meditating, and now we've read Autobiography of a Yogi.
And
Yeah.
I don't remember what actually, triggered it, but one morning, it was a Sunday morning, and it was time to go to church.
Isn't that
And
something?
and I actually called my mom. I said, "Are you going to be at church? Because I think I might go today." And I got her voicemail, and she was actually going to be somewhere else that day, and so I didn't even see her there. But I showed up at Ananda, and I can't remember ever looking back. At that point, and then I started taking our beginning meditation classes, and everything else just went on from there. And the way I think about it looking back is that I had a tool, and it was all I could handle at the beginning. And that was great because it got me this far. And then
Hmm.
when I got to the point where I could see a whole path, then I was finally ready for it. I wasn't ready for it the first time I saw Swami Kriyananda. I couldn't just dive into a whole spiritual community, whole way of life, but I could go somewhere and get a tool.
And that
And
tool was Vipassana
Vipassana
meditation, which is
meditation.
because
Yeah.
Vipassana, because I'm not as informed as you are, Vipassana is like a technique of meditation, and you go to these retreats and you practice it, but there's not a guru and there's not a whole community of people, or is
Yeah,
am I
it's
wrong?
different. And you can find group meditations to go to every once in a while, but it's nothing like this kind of a just really integrated, complete community.
Got it. That's what I
And you
was
can
saying.
just take it and go off and do it yourself forever and
Hmm.
fine.
I see.
Um,
I see. That is a big. I mean, self-realization, and especially Ananda, it's a way of life.
yeah.
Meditation is just one of the things that we do, but it is a way of life. I really see the distinction, and I can see how a person could feel more comfortable knowing that you get to keep a lot of what you get to keep a lot of yourself to yourself, and you just have to bring this into your world rather than stepping into another world. Would that be a way to say that?
Yeah, and I didn't process it that way at the time, but looking back, that's how it played out.
Right.
And this is nothing against Vipassana because you can go
Right.
very far and
Exactly.
deep into it, but at the level I was, I just took it as a thing, but I could relate to that and it could start working on me. And then I felt later on that, I had a tool when I was ready for a tool. And then when I finally came back to Ananda, I felt, oh, I had a tool. Now I have a home. Now I
I got
have
it. I have a
everything.
home. Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, and just at some point that turned and I showed up at church and there it was. And
And that was
I've been
that.
here ever since.
Right.
Yeah.
And
And
you've,
also the people that I met were just so integral in that because we've already mentioned Stanford, we mentioned Google. These are places that have this almost mystique around them, like, whoa, Stanford, Google, you went there. Wow. Um, and it's fun to be around a lot of people who are smarter than me and like, wow, they're really good at what they do, and I love it. But there weren't a lot of people that I wanted to be like
ah,
in more ways than just being smart. And ditto with being a musician. I've been a musician since I was 14. I've been part of the folk music community, just known a lot of musicians, and there are a lot of people that I would love to play music like them, but I wouldn't necessarily want to otherwise be like them.
hmm,
And suddenly, when I came to Ananda and I started meeting more people, I started going, wow, I would actually really like to be like that person. And that
hmm.
person, and that person. How did we get so many of these people
Huh,
here
huh,
in one place? This is amazing.
uh-huh.
So that was very dramatic for me also, just in those early days. It
You know,
started with Swami that first time, but it expanded to everybody else.
it's very interesting that you say that because since I was part of Ananda since 1971, since really early, and in the beginning it was there was just a lot going on. It wasn't as clearly defined. The self-definition, Swami always knew what we were doing, but the self-definition of everybody else took time to evolve because he was bringing us all up from the mud, so to speak. But I do remember the time, the point, and it was like mid to late 70s when the people of Ananda began to draw other people. And at first, it was sort of like everybody came because of Swami, or everybody came because they wanted to live in a country community and have goats and organic food or something like that. But there was actually a point in time when we began to attract each other. So what you're describing, it's very interesting. By the time you got there, that's exactly what it was, a community, in other words.
Mhm.
Yeah. Were you looking for a community?
No. So I guess the other thread that weaves through all this was your question about was I on the spiritual path and when and
Right.
everything. And, for some years before, I had had a sense that there was something that needed to be done, and
Uh-huh.
I wasn't sure what could be done about it. I took
Hmm.
a class in Buddhism in college, and it was all memorizing the different sects and the dates and and the differences in the philosophy. It's like there's no actual helpful Buddhism here in this at all.
That's why I dropped it. That's why I only lasted 1 year at Stanford. Go on.
I think that was the only religion class I took. The philosophy classes weren't any better. Um,
Uh-huh.
but there was something I noticed, which was that a lot of the people I most liked and respected were religious in some way.
Uh,
Um, one person was Jewish. I had a number of friends who were Christian, um, and and another friend who was Buddhist. And I would notice, and this sort of bugged me, that because they're different religions, but I could feel that there was some connection between the fact that they were all spiritual,
hmm.
and it really bugged me because then it's like, how do I choose a religion if they
Hmm.
all seem to work? Um, Back when I used to think I would have kids, which I'm not planning on anymore, there was a time that I knew I wanted them to be brought up in a religion. I just didn't know what,
Uh-huh.
because I could tell that there was something important. And I would have some conversations with friends, especially the Christian ones, and just try and get my mind around it. And there would always be kind of blocks that I would run into what Yogananda called churchianity. And I would go like, how can this work? But there's still
Uh-huh.
something here because there are a lot of people that I respect, that I have a heart connection with, who really deeply believe this, and it has made them what they are. So I was confused, and I would read occasional spiritual books, and I would be very respectful of spiritual things, but I didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's exactly, I didn't know what to do with it. that would have described me at, you know, I found Swami a little bit younger, but that was it. I knew there was something, and then I sort of began to understand that it was spiritual, but I didn't know what to do with it. And I think that's part of why when you meet the people of Ananda, or Swami himself, which is what I met, but the people of Ananda, somehow these people have figured out what to do with it.
Yeah.
It just sounds so mundane, but that's huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For a long time, I would read books, and usually just sort of like popular, spiritual, not religious kind of books. And it was
Mhm.
something, and I'm sure it was working on me. And, I have family that is spiritual but not religious. So I grew up kind of being okay with people talking about karma and reincarnation and whatever, but not really doing stuff with it. And so there's all this stuff kind of working at a lower level in my consciousness, but it's this undercurrent that was going on for a number of years. And, it's just, I guess, what I was ready for at any given time. And then I was ready to see Swami, and I was ready for the next thing and the next thing. And finally it built up its exit velocity and took off.
Yeah, and it took off. Do you ever, how would you say it? Do you ever think, do you ever have any regrets, I guess is actually the word? Do you ever imagine the road not taken, or is it just you're you're too happy where you are?
No, I couldn't say regretting. There's one of the other things I noticed early on about Ananda is one of my favorite words became context, which is that, trying to understand other people's beliefs, like I would always feel like I would hit a wall at some point, and this is as far as you can go. And I felt like when we got here, finally there was a picture big enough to actually encompass everything,
Mhm.
because we're working on taking ourselves to infinity. So what can possibly be left out of that? And so that's, it's, St. Peter's classic response to Jesus about where would I go? Like, even is outside the spiritual path? I'm a monk now.
Mhm.
Theoretically, I might not be a monk in the future, but I'm happy like this now. But there is a context that is so much bigger that I don't feel it's possible, never mind desirable, to get out of,
Mhm.
because it goes all the way to the top, what we're doing here.
You know that, I mean, of course, one of the reasons that we're friends is because there's a lot of similarities, I think, in the way we approach life. But what you just described is exactly what happened to me also with Ananda. I didn't really do very much, but the little bit I did before I came to Ananda, I seemed to run through it too fast. I mean, I went through college in 1 year, of course. I'm reminded in this, Yogananda has a marvelous cleansing diet. It's called the 9-Day Diet, and it's a terrible diet in the sense that it's a kind of, it doesn't matter, but it's a hard fast to go on because you eat certain foods. But I say, I got so good at the 9-Day Diet, I could just finish it in 3 days.
That's the most I've
It's
ever done on that one too.
so it's like I finished 4-year college in 1 year. I mean, you just finish things because they're not big enough. And if you have a quick mind, and especially if you have a Gemini inclination, but it is true. When I came to Ananda all those years ago, I hoped it would work for me for the rest of my life, but how did I know? But it because of the context, I never thought of it in the obvious what you just said, which is it takes us to infinity. So what could be left out? For me, it's just been more practical. It's like today is really working. Wow, that was a great decade. Boy, these 25 years have been terrific. And, I got to be 60 and whatever it was, I'd been here 40 years or something. And it was like, well, so far, so good. And it just keeps going out. Well, anyway, very, very good. Well, thank you, Tandava. Our hope is that we're going to cycle through, 4 or 5 of you and just talk more than once. I very much appreciate. I've known you for a long time, but when you finally ask the questions, it's wonderful to hear it. I'm very, very happy to have spent time with you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
God bless you.